right, good afternoon and welcome. I'm Cornelia Holstrunk, and I'm the Associate Director of the Keller Center. I am very delighted that Bill Strickland is with us today. He is a guest of both the Center for African American Studies and the Keller Center. I will say a few things about Bill in a minute, but first I'd like to say a few things about the Center for African American Studies as well as the Keller Center. Both of us are co-sponsoring this wonderful event. Launched in the fall of 2006, the Center for African American Studies expands upon some of the initiatives that were begun by the program in African American Studies at Princeton University. Since its founding in 1969, the program has offered an interdisciplinary certificate that has allowed students to draw on the insights and techniques of various disciplines in an effort to understand the experiences and the history and culture of African-descended people. The center builds upon that earlier vision and extends its reach broadly across the campus and throughout the curriculum. Understanding that African American studies is interdisciplinary and multifaceted, and that questions and concerns about race are at the center of a liberal arts education, the center offers a variety of courses, lectures, and research opportunities to more fully enrich the intellectual lives of students, faculty, and members of the larger community. The center also offers doctoral students from across the university opportunities to work with faculty in African American studies. As many of you know, in 2005, the Keller Center was established. It was generously endowed by Dennis and Constance Keller, trustee and alumnus and longtime supporter of the work here in the engineering school. The mission of the Keller Center is to educate leaders for a technology-driven society. The center is creating new courses and strengthening existing ones that reach beyond purely technical subjects to provide students a much broader understanding of the global, economic, environmental, and cultural forces that shape and are shaped by technology. At the same time, the center is enhancing students' technical education through internships, entrepreneurial opportunities, and through the exposure to real leaders through this type of lecture series. By exposing students to leaders such as Bill Strickland, they see role models and examples of service where leadership and entrepreneurship intersect to bring about very positive changes to society. Bill Strickland is the president and CEO of Manchester Bidwell Corporation and its subsidiaries, Manchester Craftsmen's Guild and Bidwell Training Center. Bill Strickland grew up in Manchester, an inner-city neighborhood in Pittsburgh. His life changed when he became inspired by his high school pottery teacher, Frank Ross. The relationship that Ross and that Strickland initiated with a revolving mound of clay gave form to the future vision of the Manchester Craftsmen's Guild. The Guild began as an after-school arts program in a donated Northside row house that Strickland was able to identify while he was still a student. He graduated cum laude in 1969 from the University of Pittsburgh with a bachelor's degree in American history and foreign relations. The decline of the steel industry created widespread unemployment, and Bill Strickland added the Bidwell Training Center in 1972, which offered vocational training to displaced and underemployed workers. Bill envisioned a template for social change, and he began to form relationships with businesses, government officials, and individuals who shared this vision with him. Today, Manchester Bidwell Corporation has evolved into a national model for education, culture, and hope. There is also a youth and arts and jazz program, which are both parts of the Manchester Craftsmen Guild, and I'm sure you'll talk more about these in a minute. And the youth program serves approximately 4,000 youth per year through classes and workshops in ceramics, photography, digital imaging, and art. Throughout Strickland's distinguished career, he has been honored with many prestigious awards for his contributions to the arts and to the community, including the coveted MacArthur Genius Award. Strickland has also been honored by the White House and has served on the board of the National Endowment for the Arts. He has said, and I love this quote, so I'm just going to share it with the audience, "Entrepreneurs are by definition visionaries. The use of art to change students' attitudes is at the heart of my vision of education. I see a connection between the creativity instilled by the love of the arts and the skills needed for business success. Artists are by nature entrepreneurs. They can visualize something that does not exist, to look at a canvas and to see a painting. Entrepreneurs and artists are interchangeable." And with that, Bill, I'd like to welcome you. Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks. I'm going to show you some pictures. I don't have any speech. I wouldn't do that to you at this late hour of the day. Plus, I don't do prepared speeches anymore because I don't think they're very useful. What I did was took pictures of what I do for a living in Pittsburgh. And the pictures people remember after they've forgotten the speeches. So I do pictures. And these pictures have gotten me into some really interesting places, including Princeton and Harvard and Stanford and a bunch of other places. So I'm going to stay with the pictures. They seem to be working out pretty good. The other thing I really want you to know, whatever I've done, I've kind of backed into it. This wasn't sort of planned. My life has been a series of discoveries about my own capacity and having the presence of mind to build on relationships. And it's very important that you understand where I started so that you can appreciate where I ended up. And although I did go to the University of Pittsburgh, I enrolled at the University of Pittsburgh as a probationary student because my art teacher, Mr. Ross, said, "You're too smart to die, you're going to college." He drove me out to the University of Pittsburgh. They put this test in front of me called the Scholastic Aptitude Test, which I'd never seen before. So I promptly marked it up, flunked the test, get in on probation. And, well, I'm pleased to tell you I graduated from Pitt with honors. Now I'm a trustee of the University of Pittsburgh. And I actually was the commencement speaker. I got up in front of 13,000 people and said, don't give up on the poor kids. They might end up being the commencement speaker. And basically that's the story. People are born into the world as assets, not liabilities. It's all the way you treat people that drives behavior. So now that I'm getting to be a big shot, speaking at Princeton and all that, there's a tendency to want to not tell you about the background that got me here. But if I don't tell you about how I got here, the story doesn't make any sense. I was a poor kid from a poor neighborhood. I still live in that neighborhood, by the way. My whole 63 years in life is 6 blocks. Now here's the poor kid. He gets into Pitt on probation, wins the MacArthur Fellowship, the so-called Genius Award. And you know who was in my class for MacArthur Fellows? Stephen Hawking. So forget the SAT test. You know, intelligence is measured in many different ways. And Stephen Hawking had one form and I had something else. So that's very important because if you understand that story, then you understand where my center's coming from. Because I really believe that people are born into the world as assets. It's the environment that drives behavior. If you build beautiful environments, you get beautiful outcomes. You build prisons, you get prisoners. So I built this center to reflect my philosophy of doing business. And part of it was influenced by Mr. Ross, my art teacher, who ironically was killed in a traffic accident. He never lived to see this center built. But he knew I was going to be okay because what was not mentioned in my resume is I also used to be an airline pilot. I flew 727s for Braniff Airlines. I was an airline captain. And part of the reason I wanted to fly jets was to prove to myself that I was working with the poor folks because I wanted to, not because I had to. It's very easy to work with the poor people if you can't do nothing else. They'll take you in. So I wanted to prove to myself that I was working with all these poor folks, not because I had to be down there, but because I elected to do this work. So I could think of myself as an airline captain who happened to be working with poor people. And in an odd sort of way, that freed me up to do all this work I've been doing ever since. Now, the company, Braniff, went out of business, but it was a good ride. I met some great guys, and it underscored my own confidence in my ability to do anything. So if an inner city kid from a poorly run public school who flunks the SAT test comes from a poor black family whose mom never graduated from high school, the kid becomes an airline captain and a MacArthur Fellow and gets a PhD from Rutgers with Stevie Wonder. Don't give up on the poor kids, is the moral of the story. So I built this center. Mr. Ross took me to see a very famous house that a guy named Frank Lloyd Wright built. You heard of him? He did okay in the architecture business. And Mr. Ross took a bunch of us poor kids to see a very famous house called Falling Water. It's just south of Pittsburgh. So here's this Italian guy with these black kids in this van, and you go down through the woods, and you come out into this clearing. There's this fabulous house set up on a boulder with a creek running right down through the middle of the house. And I looked at that, and I said, in my neighborhood, we spend time trying to keep the water out of the house. This guy's got a creek running right down through the middle of the place. That's an interesting way of looking at water. The other thing that fascinated me was the quality of the light. that enveloped the house. I said, if I can get that light into my neighborhood, I'm halfway home. So I committed myself to building a Frank Lloyd Wright building before I left the planet, and I did. I'm going to show it to you, because I hired one of his students to build this center. That's the center we built. This is my concept of what a school for poor people is supposed to look like. This happens to be in the highest crime rate neighborhood in Pittsburgh. And then 26 years of operation in this Frank Lloyd Wright-inspired building, not one act of vandalism, no theft, no racial incidents, no drugs, no alcohol, zero. Now, when y'all come to Pittsburgh, and you're all invited, remind me to show you my old high school. It's still there. It's 4 blocks away. It has steel doors and bars in the windows and metal detectors in the same neighborhood. Now, you tell me. I'm either the luckiest guy in Pittsburgh, or there's something about the way in which we've elected to treat these kids. And if you treat people like human beings, it increases the likelihood they're going to act that way. If you treat them like prisoners, I guarantee you they're going to act like prisoners. So the first thing you do in the morning is walk through a metal detector before you go to class. You're already a prisoner in your head. So I said, forget the metal detectors, throw the things away. We're not putting a metal detector in this school, and it worked out fine, 26 years later. That's the entrance to the building. I am a big believer in art for the environment. That's all my taste, by the way, because I raised all the money. I said to my board, when you raise the money, we'll put your taste on the wall. But we have quotes and clay and calligraphy, and everywhere your eye turns, there's something beautiful looking back at you. That's quite deliberate. In 26 years of operation in this building, we've never had one act of graffiti or theft. I have a couple $100,000 worth of artwork appraised value. We haven't lost anything. Now, you can say I'm the luckiest guy in Pittsburgh, but I don't think so. I think environment drives behavior. If you don't remember anything else I said for the next half hour, environment drives behavior. That's the principle. We have Amish quilts. That's our boardroom. I commissioned a Japanese cabinet maker to do 60 pieces of furniture for our school. I hired the guy from Kyoto, Japan. In the old days, we were a building trades program, and a friend of mine went to Kyoto and married this guy and brought him back to Pittsburgh. And she called me up and says, my husband's from Kyoto, and he's a woodworker, and I understand you teach carpentry, which we did. I was wondering if you give him a job. I said, well, bring the guy over. I'll talk to him. Well, he didn't speak any English. And you can imagine how much Japanese I speak. But I found out he had studied with George Nakashima, who was one of the great Japanese-American woodworkers. And I was hip to Nakashima. So I tell your husband I'm going to give him a job teaching carpentry. And he stood up and he bowed and he said, please tell Mr. Strickland, I'm really grateful for the job, but I apologize that my English is so poor. I said, well, tell your husband that the students he's going to work with don't speak English either, so you ought to get along fine. And I hired this guy, and it worked out fine. A lot of the women and most of the black folks that got into the carpenters union were trained by this guy. But I got 60 pieces of furniture out of it for our school. Now, we spun this guy off into his own business. He has a year waiting list doing furniture for rich people in Pittsburgh. But we got 60 pieces out of it for our school. Why? Because the kids deserve it, that's why. You build beautiful environments, you get beautiful kids. We even have fresh flowers in the building every day. And part of the reason I won the MacArthur Fellowship, you know, the Genius Award, I figured out the cure for spiritual cancer. It's called sunlight and fresh flowers and good food and enthusiasm, and you can cure cancer of the kids. Stephen Hawking figured out the origin of the universe. I figured out how to cure cancer in poor people. And it's called life and hope and human possibility. Now, I don't have a PhD in education. I have a bachelor's degree in history. Lucky to have that the way I behaved. But it's worked out fine. And all these little details that you don't think matter, they matter. I don't want to offend anybody, but I ain't promoting plastic flowers, man. I have never figured out the aesthetic contribution of plastic flowers to the world, but I don't have them in my school. Now that I'm getting to be a big shot, you know, giving speeches all over the place at Princeton, this and that, we had a bunch of high school principals come visit my school. They said, man, Mr. Strickland, this place is fabulous. And we were really blown away by them flowers. We were curious how them flowers got there. I said, well, I got in my car and I went out to the greenhouse and I bought them and I brought them back and I put them there. You don't need a task force or a study group to buy flowers for your kids. The children deserve fresh flowers in their life. The cost is incidental, but the gesture is very significant. And I'm telling you, with all my 14 PhDs and my lectures at the Harvard Business School, flowers matter, big time. That's at Christmas time. Y'all eat Heinz ketchup up here at the Princeton University? Well, good, you ought to eat more of it. I don't know where your politics are about ketchup, but I stand with ketchup. In the old days, before I got real sophisticated, I had a cardboard box built in my school and I had it in a garbage bag. I was trying to raise money, and I was dragging this box over Pittsburgh, and I got called into the office of United States Senator John Heinz, who was the heir to the Heinz ketchup fortune, which was like going to see the Wizard of Oz, because he had about 600 million at the time and I had about 60 cents. And he said, man, you've done a great job with the black folks and the poor kids, and we understand you want to build a new school. I said, yeah, I do. He said, well, you could really help the Heinz Company's affirmative action goals out if you'd add a culinary program in your new school. That way we could hire some black folks and solve the affirmative action problem for the Heinz Ketchup Company. Well, we were a building trades program back then, remember? And I said, Senator, I'm really reluctant to go into a field I don't know anything about, but I promise you, if you give me some money, I'll build a school, I'll come back in a couple years and we'll get that culinary program going just like you asked. And he sat real quietly. He said, well, what would your answer be if I said I'd give you $1 million? I said, Senator, it appears that we're going into the food training business. And John Heinz did give me $1 million. But as importantly, he loaned me the head of research for the Heinz Company, and we created a gourmet cooks program for welfare mothers in this $1 million kitchen. Now, we lost John Heinz to a plane accident. We lost the President of the United States. It is my view that he would have been handing the keys to President-elect Obama in the White House, but he didn't make it. But if y'all come to visit Pittsburgh, you'll feel his presence at the front door of this building. So I take welfare mothers with no background in food. I have them performing as gourmet chefs and cooks in 12 months flat with no background in food in this $1 million kitchen. Oh, by the way, in the middle of the highest crime neighborhood in Pittsburgh, where we've never had one incident. We built an amphitheater for the students, as you can see. We bring chefs in from all over the world who do product presentations. Why? You want people to perform at a world-class level, you got to bring the world there so they know what it looks like. So we bring chefs from all over the world who do product presentations in our center. Hershey Chocolate, Heinz Ketchup Company, and so forth. Some of our students, we took the design from a Ritz-Carlton hotel and we built it. So our guys are being trained to a Ritz-Carlton standard in 10 months. That's in celebration of a salmon I caught in Lake Michigan and brought back to Pittsburgh and did my version of a fish fry. And I had all this fish, and I'm thinking, what am I going to do with all this? So I had a fish fry. I gave the fish to the culinary department, and we did our version of a fish presentation, which was 3 forks and 3 knives, ice sculpture, and imported wines. And I invited 100 of my corporate buddies to this fish fry. And one guy was so taken with the concept of the center, he gave us a check for $300,000. One salmon, $300,000. Calculate the return on investment for that one piece of salmon. So as you might suspect, we now do salmon presentations quite regularly at our center. This is the work that the poor folks are doing after 6 months. These are all the people who supposedly don't have any talent or any ability. Well, we found out something very interesting about poor people, which you can quote me on. The only thing that we can determine that's wrong with poor people is they don't have any money, which is a curable condition. It's all in the way you think about people that drives behavior. You build world-class standards, that's what poor people do in 6 months with no background in food preparation, as sure as I'm standing here at this podium. Oh, by the way, that's lunch at the school. This isn't just for the slideshow. We feed this to the students every day. Why? You can't teach people when they're hungry. So the answer is give them something to eat, but we don't do fast food, we do gourmet food. And if people tell you that you can't serve poor people gourmet food, send them to Pittsburgh. I've been doing it for 22 years. You just have to want to do it bad enough. We emphasize color and texture and presentation. That's all pastry. Actually sat down and ate a whole basket one time. It was very good. That's our dining room. Looks like your average high school cafeteria in your hometown, right? Well, this is where students eat. Why? Because there's nothing wrong with the kids or the adults. They need to be treated with dignity. You treat people with dignity, you solve the problem. This is in the black neighborhood with a high crime rate, and we've never had one incident. Oh, it's also cross-marketing. I'm very aware that half y'all in here are entrepreneurs, so you always got to be looking for the business application. And believe me, I think like that. So we do a lot of cross-marketing. We do a lot of concert dinners. The Medical Association, the Engineer Society rent this space from us. So we do a lot of black tie functions at the school as well. We also train pharmaceutical technicians for the pharmacy industry. When you guys come visit, I'll show you poor folks with no background in science doing pharmaceutical applications in about 8 months, going to work for the pharmaceutical industry, big time. Every graduate of the last class of pharmaceutical technicians went to work. We had 100% placement. And these are people with no background in science. And so we have them working for Thrift Drug, Rite Aid, all the retail and wholesale pharmacy facilities in Western Pennsylvania. I'll take our people. And that will be true for the next 10 years. It's on a very steep growth trajectory, and we're right there. So mostly all the African-American pharmaceutical techs in Western Pennsylvania are guys that came out of my program. We also train chemical technicians for the chemical industry. You heard of Bayer Company, Alcoa, PPG, Calgon Carbon, Nova Chemical. I train technicians for all those companies, Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 companies. And our guys are outperforming Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry employees at the Bayer Chemical Company. For real. I got 40 research technicians working for Bayer in Pittsburgh, and our guys are in every one of their research facilities. And we now know that we can train analytical chemistry and using logarithmic calculators to welfare mothers in my center. I've been doing it for 15 years. In case you haven't noticed, this country's going down fast. And one of the reasons it's going down is all these people we're calling liabilities are actually assets. But you have to think about them that way. So part of my proposal is, let's take all the poor folks and train them to be competent technicians and contributors to society, and they can earn their way. I'm doing it in Pittsburgh. And oh, by the way, I'm doing it for half the cost of the public school system, which has a 50% dropout rate with the same kids. So don't tell me about the math. I got the math all figured out. I'm telling you, you can take welfare mothers and have them doing chemical applications in 12 months. I don't care where they're from. One of our students, we even teach people how to read. One of my buddies is right back there, Hugh Price. Raise your hand so they know who you are. He actually funded one of my early programs in literacy. He was with the Rockefeller Foundation. He's not teaching here. So part of this is to let y'all know what I did with your money, Hugh, so it worked out all right. I'm taking folks who can't read C-Spot Run, and we can have them doing a high school reading in about 20 weeks. And then we put them into the training program, because if they ain't reading, they also ain't working. I have students in this program with high school diplomas that they cannot read. Not one of them, I got a lot of them. And I'm telling you, we're going down, man. If black people and Hispanic kids, and poor white kids for that matter, are graduating from schools and can't read the diplomas they're being granted, we're done. This has got to stop. And part of the reason I'm on this very fast trajectory is to turn this conversation around. Well, they read at my center fine, because we make sure they read fine, and then we put them into training and get them a job and solve the problem. That's our library, more of our handcrafted furniture. Every technical thing that we do in the center is represented in the library. We also teach people how to use a library, because they never used one before, so we get that problem figured out along the way. And this is the arts program. You remember I'm the black guy from the 60s making pottery? Before, I suspect most of y'all were born. How many of you even around in the 60s? Raise your hand. Well, that's cool, okay. One time I did the presentation, nobody raised their hand. So I got to check out who I'm talking to, the jokes don't work. Well, I was around in the 60s during the disturbances. Back then we called them what they were riots, and guys were getting shot, and I wanted to help out, man. So I knew something about clay, so I set up a little row house in the ghetto. I lived upstairs in a sleeping bag. I had potty wheels in the basement, and I started dragging kids in off the street to save their souls with clay. And I'm still doing it on a much bigger scale. The bishop of the Episcopal diocese took a liking to me, and he used to write checks out of the bishop's discretionary fund, and that's how I got started. So technically, this was started by a white Episcopal bishop who mentored this black kid who had visions of pottery in his head, who wanted to save everybody. Well, the bishop died a number of years ago, and his family asked me to speak at his memorial service because they felt that my life best represented what the bishop was all about. So the point of the story is, don't judge the book by the cover, because you never know in what form your next friend's going to show up. So if you treat everybody the same, it increases the likelihood something good's going to happen to you. So this all started because of a white Episcopal bishop who was a good guy. And his family said that he cried like a baby before he died when he saw my name in the New York Times with my first presidential appointment. President Bush 41 appointed me to the National Endowment for the Arts. So here's the kid from the inner city who gets mentored by a white Episcopal bishop, and the kid goes on to get a presidential appointment. Well, welcome to America. That's what this country should be all about, and every once in a while actually is. So I have 500 kids from the public school who come to me after school for clay, photography, and digital imaging, starting at grade 8, 13 through 17. I stay with them through high school. We called up 90 kids last year to find out what happened to them. 92% of them were in college. And we do not teach the academics. What we teach is motivation. The reason I won the MacArthur is I figured out in the hemisphere of the brain where the human imagination lies is where learning lives. You unlock imagination, you unlock learning, you unlock performance. Bottom line. So that's why we employ the arts. It is not to train artists. You walk away here thinking that's why I'm here, you flunked the course, man, because that's not what I came up here to talk about. What I want to try to do as dramatically as possible is to illustrate to you that the arts has something to do with learning. You change the way that people feel, you change the way they learn. So that if you figure out how to get kids feeling confident about themselves, you can teach them algebra. If they don't feel confident about themselves, you can't teach them anything. And the arts does that because it appeals to that hemisphere of the brain. Now there's a big shot up at Harvard named Howard Gardner, who developed something called the theory of multiple intelligence. Well, when Howard came to visit my school in Pittsburgh, he said it was the first demonstration system-wide of the theory of multiple intelligence he'd ever visited. He's also a MacArthur Fellow, by the way. So we do clay. This is all kids' work. Now, artistic aptitude, whatever that is not a requirement to get into the program. Any kid that makes the mistake of scratching their head during the presentation's in the program. So get your mother to sign a piece of paper so you get on a school bus and you're good to go. We lose 20% of the kids in the first 30 days when they discover it's not an adult daycare center, it's an arts program to save your life. 90% of those kids went through the program, and they're doing fine. 6 of my faculty are former kids, went through the program. So now I have a faculty that represents the next generation of leaders that came out of an inner city arts program. This is all from the kids that supposedly don't have any ability. This is a mosaic project we did with the kids. I brought in a woman named Sana Musasama, who's one of the great African-American mosaic artists in the world. I brought her to Pittsburgh to teach these kids how to do that. And before he died, there was a very famous photographer, Life magazine photographer named Gordon Parks. He actually came to my center and taught the kids photography. Why? You have to put world-class images in front of these kids so they know what the world looks like. And they'll want to be like him people when they grow up. This is one of the pieces the kids did. This is the other piece they did. These are all the kids with no ability, remember? So what we figured out, these kids got plenty of talent. You just have to give them the tools so they can show you what they're capable of. Now, why all the PhDs running the school system can't figure this out, I figured it out with a bachelor's degree in history from the University of Pittsburgh. Hello? We do photography. The kid who took that picture is working for Disney, got a 4-year scholarship. This is the gallery. This is the student show. This is our concept how to treat kids from the inner city. By the time they graduate from high school, they've had 4 shows on their resume and a CD-ROM that documents everything they've done with us for 4 years. which they give to the admissions officer. It's all up here, guys. You got to change the way that people think. You change the way they think, you can solve the problem. And as sure as I'm standing at this podium, I'm going to send some people to Princeton. You can take it to the bank, man. If I don't get anything else out of this visit, I'm going to get to know all y'all because I want some kids to come here. We got them ready to go to Princeton. This is the show that the kids are doing. We even got their parents coming. 15 years ago, we couldn't buy a parent. We do the shows and now the parents would show up for the children. So one of my buddies got off in the saving souls for Jesus. You know, dragging guys out of bars with a Bible and all that kind of stuff. I says, I want you to come work for me. You got to tone down the Jesus stuff a little bit, but keep the enthusiasm. I can't get the parents to come. He said, I'll get them to come. So he took the keys to the van and started going to the parents' house. Miss Jones, I knew you wanted to come to your kid's art opening, but you probably didn't have a ride. So I came to give you a ride. Well, we got 10 parents, 20 parents. The last show, 200 parents. And we didn't pick up one parent. You know why? Now it's not cool not to show up and support your kids at the Manchester Craftsman's Guild art opening, or people think you're a lousy parent. There's no statistical difference between white mothers and black mothers and Asian mothers and Hispanic mothers. Mothers will go where their kids are being nurtured every day of the week. So we got that problem figured out. Actually, this is an old slide. You know, before I got real fancy with my little PowerPoint, I actually had slides in a box with duct tape on the corner and a slide projector. And I got called out to a place called the Silicon Valley. So I showed up with my slide projector. These people looked at me like I was from Pluto, man. But that's cool. I blew off the dust, plugged in my slide projector, did my little presentation. The lady came out of the audience. She said, man, what a story. My only criticism is your computers are getting a little bit old. Well, ain't no high-tech guy. They all look about the same to me. I said, well, what do you do for a living? She said, well, I help run a company called Hewlett-Packard. I said, well, my dear, there's an instantaneous solution to this problem. And the long and short of it is we got $1 million from HP and the systems engineer to go with it. And we now have one of the hippest digital imaging centers east of the Mississippi River. And I'm putting kids into the Rhode Island School of Design and Pratt right out of the imaging center. But I keep this slide in here for nostalgia reasons. And you never know when an Apple representative might be in the audience. This is the center that we built for the kids. This is called a school. This is how you're supposed to treat your kids. You build centers like that, you send them to places like Princeton or Rhode Island School of Design instead of to the penitentiary. We also built a music hall. I stuck a music hall in the north end of the building. I'm very glad I did because a very famous trumpet player named Dizzy Gillespie showed up. And I said to Dizzy Gillespie, why would you come to a black school in the middle of the inner city that doesn't even have a reputation in music? He said, Billy Taylor told me a black guy built it I didn't believe one to see for myself. And you're too young to appreciate what you built here, but I'm not. And you ought to build one of these centers in every city in America, and I'm going to help you do it. I said, well, you came here, that's cool. He said, no, I'm going to allow you to record the concert. I'm going to give you the rights to the music, which he did. And then a piano player named Herbie Hancock showed up, and Herbie said, Dizzy's talking about you, and now I know why, man. And then Wynton Marsalis dropped by, and then the Count Basie Orchestra, and Shirley Horn, and Betty Carter, and Nancy Wilson, a piano player named Ahmed Jamal, flute player named Hubert Laws, and it's worked out pretty good. We now have 600 recordings. The most important collection of jazz recordings in the world is in my center in Pittsburgh. Y'all ever heard of something called the Grammy Awards? Well, we've won 4. 9 Grammy nominations, 4 wins. Inner city black program in a high crime rate neighborhood. So nobody can tell me that we got to be living like this. If I'm generating Grammys out of the middle of a black neighborhood with a high crime rate, why are we living like this, man? Is the question y'all got to ask yourself. That's the place all filled up with rich people on opening night. If you'd have dropped a bomb in that room, you'd have wiped out all the money in Pennsylvania because it was all sitting there, including my mom and dad who are on the left-hand side in the 3rd row. They're both now deceased, but they lived long enough to see their kid build a center in the neighborhood and open it up black tie. The next night I had the neighborhood come in. They had the same food both nights. Why? I wanted to establish the principle that you don't have to have a tuxedo on to be treated like a world-class citizen. And I knew when people started talking about that, so we now sell out all of our concerts in subscription 3 weeks after the season's announced. And if y'all ain't doing nothing this weekend, come to Pittsburgh. Nancy Wilson's coming back. We got her Friday and Saturday night, man, big time. And we're going to record it. There's Dizzy, just in case you thought I was lying. He was there. That's a fellow named Jerry Mulligan and Billy Taylor. That's a fellow named Pat Metheny and Jim Hall. Their album made the top 10. So we become the hot digital recording studio in America, by the way. Paul Simon, his engineers designed that for free. And Nancy Wilson did back-to-back Grammys with us. 2 Grammys, back-to-back. At the Grammy Awards, she stood up and said, God bless the Manchester Craftsmen's Guild and Bill Strickland and Marty Ashby and these guys who understand that the music of Ella Fitzgerald and Sarah Vaughan and Duke Ellington cures cancer of the spirit. And they also understand that this music must be preserved for future generations. So every time I give a speech nowadays, I reconfirm my commitment to preserving this music of Nat King Cole for the future generation of these children. I am not standing here protecting the music of Snoop Dogg, which I think is going the other way, by the way. These are all children from the Pittsburgh Public School. When they come over, we play on music. We don't call it jazz, we call it music. We have like Batman and the Flintstones to jazz. The place is swinging, the kids love it. The only problem is they got to go back from our place where they're excited back to school where they get depressed. So I'm advancing a new concept. Why don't we start building schools that kids get excited about? Because if you get excited to go there, you can teach them something. They get excited to go to my school, so what's the excuse, guys? Now, for all you business majors, this is where the story takes another interesting business principle. And John, this is where I'm going to answer one of your questions. This was next to my fancy building I've been showing you. Just in case y'all thought I was in downtown Pittsburgh, this is what the neighborhood looks like, or used to look like. So I got tired of looking at that. So I had another cardboard box built, had another garbage bag, hit the streets again 20 years later. And I built that. That's a market rate commercial office building that makes money, by the way, in the middle of the inner city of Pittsburgh. I get downtown rental rates in the black neighborhood. And we also have never had one incident of vandalism or theft or a police call. I have a multi-million-dollar commercial office building that our school owns. So we're now in the real estate business. And my real estate buddies said I did pretty good. I pre-leased the building before I built it, which is apparently the way you're supposed to do real estate. And the thing actually makes money in the middle of the hood. And the way I got into this deal, there's a fountain. Every building's going to have a fountain. University of Pittsburgh Medical Center is our partner. Now, here's the business principle. The head of the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center is a guy named Jeff Romoff. He eats nails for breakfast. And I wanted to meet this dude, so I kept pestering his executive assistant, and finally he relented, and he said, all right, I'm coming over to see your little center. You got 20 minutes. So he walks in. I said, it's a great honor to meet you, Mr. Romoff. He said, well, that's all cool. You got 19 minutes and 30 seconds. So I'm dragging this guy up and down the hallway. At the end of the 20 minutes, he says, wow, fabulous. You got more than 20 minutes. You have as much time as you need. He says, what do you want from me? I said, I want everything from you. He said, can you be a little more specific? I said, yeah, I can be specific. So he left, and one of his guys hung back. He said, man, if there was ever a time that you want to be late for an appointment, it's when you go to see Mr. Romoff the next time. I would take him seriously. So I wrote all this stuff down over the weekend. I called up Jeff. I went back to see him the following Tuesday. And Jeff said, what do you got for me? I said, I want 3 things from you, man. The first is I want to build a building because I like building real estate. And I was wondering if you'd be the anchor tenant in the building. He said, yeah, that's cool. How much is that going to cost me? I said, how about $21 triple net? He said, man, you learned the real estate game pretty fast. That's cool. I'll sign up. So I took the lease. I borrowed $8 million and built the building. He moved part of his billing operation into the building, 1 for 1. Jeff says, what's this training business? I want to start training medical technicians for your medical center. He said, brilliant. If you're training them for Bayer and Alcoa and PPG, you can train them for me, 2 for 2. He said, nobody ever gets 2 for 2 out of me. I said, well, there's a third thing on that paper, man. He said, well, what's this $3 million business? I said, well, I want to be like the symphony and the ballet and them guys. They all got something called an endowment. I was wondering if you'd be the lead gift for the endowment. He says, you got it, which means I should have asked for 6. But I figured I was $3 million ahead of where I was at 45 seconds ago. And then Jeff turned to me and he said, now let me tell you why I'm doing this. It is not because I'm a liberal, because I'm not a liberal. Not one time during your whole presentation at your school did you ask my views on race. So I didn't have to pass a test to be associated with you, for which I'm very grateful. Number 2, I know all about you, man, in your Harvard Business School cases and this and that. I think you're sitting on a big story, and I want to get in on the ground floor. Number 3, I will never be ashamed being associated with you because you don't look like a poverty program, because you're not a poverty program. Your facilities are better run than my hospitals. So I will be proud to be associated with you. And then finally, and here's the business principle, if you don't mind my being a little more characteristically cynical, every one of them black kids you showed me over at your pottery shop, I saw a $sign over their head. I said, what are you talking about? He says, well, your kids all go to college, right? I said, yes, sir. He said, well, that means they're not in my emergency room with bullets in their head. It now costs me $150,000 per kid to take the bullets out of their head. You're in the healthcare business. The future of healthcare is keeping people out of hospitals, not putting them in hospitals, and your guys are doing it better than my own emergency room physicians, so I have a business reason to keep you alive. That was an interesting conversation. There's the building, Citizens Bank, retail bank in Pittsburgh's in there. That's the entrance to the building. This is all in an inner city neighborhood, by the way. Environment drives behavior. Oh, those are orchids. They ain't plastic either. Those are real. And the reason I have them in my building is I grow them in that greenhouse. Wow. I built a 40,000 square foot greenhouse next to my training center. So we got the welfare mothers growing orchids. Big time. Good for their spirits, good for their heads. And we set this up as an advanced technology horticultural training program. So I got welfare mothers growing orchids. And at one of our recent graduations, oh, by the way, we get 85% of the students work in the industry for which they were trained. The orchids, by the way, we don't sell them to eat them. We sell them to sell them. We grow them to sell them. So, you know, you've heard of an outfit called Whole Foods? Well, they buy our orchids in an outfit called Giant Eagle. Now, we ain't going to get rich selling orchids, but we'll do $350,000 this year, which we take to subsidize the school, because everything I'm showing you today is free. There's no tuition for this. So I raise all the money. It's a tuition-free education. So we take the orchid proceeds, the jazz proceeds, the rental income. So at the end of the day, I've had a great year when my income and my expense are in exactly the same place. I've had a great year. Okay? Got it? Got the business principle? So at the graduation, this woman came up to me with tracts up her arm, and she said, I want you to know that you saved my life. I said, well, how did I save your life? She said, well, I'm off for drugs. And when I went to Canada on a field trip with the horticultural program, the customs agent called me ma'am when I crossed the border for the first time in memory. Thank you. Later on, she was over in the corner, and she was talking to this white lady. I'm real photographic in the way I see stuff. I said, there's the ticket, man. You know what they were talking about? Not race and not poverty, orchids. So you have to change the conversation. You get this conversation talking about life, not death, we can finally get home. Now I'll finish this up in a couple slides. There's the tissue lab. Those are the orchids we're growing. By the way, we took first and second prize in the Orchid Symposium. So now the Orchid Society meets at my center in Pittsburgh. It's good for everybody. Those orchids. And now I'm down to the end of the presentation. Now this is where the story takes another interesting turn. You remember I was out there at Silicon Valley with my little slideshow, and the lady from HP come out of the audience? Well, this young guy come out of the audience. He said, boy, what a story. I said, cool, man. What do you do for a living? He said, oh, I built a company called eBay. I said, oh, that's cool. You got a card? Remember, I ain't the techie guy. I didn't know what eBay was. So I put the guy's card in my pocket, and I went back to Pittsburgh, and I asked one of the little techie kids, I said, what is eBay, man? He said, Mr. Strickland, that's the Electronic Commerce Network. I said, holy smokes, I met the guy that built the company. So I called him up. I said, Mr. Skull, I've come to have a much deeper appreciation of who you are, man. And he laughed. He said, I thought you'd figure it out sooner or later. Here's $500,000. I said, what's that for? He says, your first replication. Against all probability, Jeff Skull and I have become very close friends. The kid's got $5 billion liquid. He's the 13th richest guy in America. He's 43 years old, and he's a type A just like me. And I'm sitting in the guy's mansion in Palo Alto one night, and I said, Jeff, what do you need me for, man? You built eBay, one of the world's great companies. What do you need with a black guy with one program for in Pittsburgh? He said, during your whole presentation, there was only one word in my mind. I said, what was that? He said, scalable. I think you're eBay on the social side. And I'm going to stick around and see if I'm right. So he gave me some money. We hired a couple of guys from Bain & Company, Bridgespan. We wrote a business plan, how to go to scale. We're starting to build centers around the country. It is not a franchise. It's not McDonald's. We ain't stamping out hamburgers. But we're building centers, and the business model is a replication model. We're all affiliated with each other. Why? Because of strength in numbers. We can exchange currency. We can exchange curriculum. We can exchange intellectual property, okay? And there's strength in numbers, as you'll see in a minute. So Cincy, Cleveland, Grand Rapids, and Frisco are open and operating. There's the space in Frisco for it was fixed up. There's Mr. eBay, Jeff Skull on the right, Billy Wong, the director, and the kids are doing digital imaging. Cincinnati, we cut the dropout rate to 6% in 24 months. And I don't live in Cincinnati, I live in Pittsburgh. So you can't say it's me, it's the value proposition. There's this building, that's the gallery, digital imaging, and graphic design, and the kids turned this into a business. They're doing murals at $10,000 a pop all over Cincinnati. Look at the outcomes we're getting. This is what Hugh founded at Rockefeller, was to get me in the game so I could start doing this stuff. Right? Now I live in these other cities. You see all them 95 percentiles up at the top? I don't have a degree in education, guys. I have a bachelor's degree in history. Hello? This is the newest one. This is Grand Rapids. The guy who built this one just died last year of leukemia. He was one of the heirs to the Steelcase fortune, the furniture company. And the DeVos family, you've heard of them, Amway? Yeah, well, Jim saw my slideshow, said we got to build one in Grand Rapids. Well, he did. They raised $6 million in about 60 days. Put this thing in downtown Grand Rapids on behalf of the poor folks. And Jim called me from the Anderson Cancer Center last year. He said, I don't think I'm coming home. But I would like you to remember me in your speeches for the center that I built, not the money I made with Steelcase. That's called a testimony. Because I can stand up and talk all day long about the poor folks, because I think I got another 20 years left or so. When you're down to your last 3 weeks, that's called a testimony. These are all pictures of Dr. King taken during the last 2 years of his life until he was assassinated. This is how you're supposed to treat poor people. This is called a school. You get it? Every center is beautiful, no matter where they are. They all have the same value proposition. No used equipment. That's the food facility. That's what students eat every day. That's the pharmacy computer lab. That's the graphics and digital lab for the kids. Oh, in Grand Rapids, we cut the dropout rate to 5%. In an interstate school system with a 50% dropout rate, same kids. These are some of the students. And one of the ways that we now know that the program is beginning to take effect, the kids start pulling their pants up. And when they put a belt on, I know I got them. These used to be called welfare mothers. You know what they are now? Pharmaceutical technicians. They work for the DeVos medical system in Grand Rapids. They're out of poverty and they ain't coming back. Oh, in 10 months, by the way. Cleveland opens November 4. If you're walking the streets with nothing to do, Cleveland opens November 4, big time. Cleveland Foundation, Ron Richards, made a big bet on this thing, $3 million. We're opening, we got the kids from the school system, we're training people for the university hospital system, and Cleveland Clinic. Got it open, doing great stuff. That's 4 open now, plus Pittsburgh is 5. There's the programs, there's the space. And we're now planning centers in Austin, Boston, Charlotte, Chicago, Columbus, Minneapolis, New Haven. Chattanooga and St. Louis are in early discussions. Halifax is our first international one. And a very famous guy that Kevin and I know real well lives there. His name is Bob Kelly. And another guy that happens to be from Halifax, he's a hockey player named Sidney Crosby. He and I are going to become very good friends sooner than he thinks, because I intend to ask him if he'll help me build this center in Halifax. And Limerick, Ireland, and Northern Israel, and San Jose, Costa Rica, and Vancouver. The goal is to build 200 centers, 100 in the U.S. and 100 around the world, and that will be my little contribution to mankind. Thank you very much. And then finally, the reason I came up here is not only to tell you the story, but to get y'all to buy this book. I have a book out. It's called Make the Impossible Possible. I want 2 things. I want it adopted as freshman reader if y'all got one at Princeton. And if you do, I'll come back and talk about the book. 2, if y'all buy a book, it gets me, every time I sell a book, it gets me a ½ inch closer to getting on Oprah. And if I get on Oprah and she finds out I'm the black guy that built the school in Pittsburgh, it looks just like that school she built in Africa, now we can get down to cases. Because what I want Oprah to say is, well, I'll call my friend the President of the United States, who I think would like this story. Because everything he talked about in the State of the Union, I just showed you in a bunch of slides, guys. Economic development, reclaiming the poor, revitalizing inner cities, having a relationship with corporate America, blah, 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 blah. I already got it open, man. This first center in Pittsburgh has been open 40 years. All right, it passes all the financial audits. I got all the metrics, and we got this thing solved. We got it solved. What I need is funding so I can scale it. So I'm down in Washington, D.C. I hired 2 lobbyists. I'm getting just like the big guys, the banks and the auto companies and everybody. You know, I was trying to force my way into the congressional offices, but the banks and the auto companies got there first with the handout. And I said, well, why are y'all writing all these checks for everybody? Why don't you throw a couple nickels for the poor people? And I'll build you centers that'll solve this problem right now. Well, I got 20 congressmen willing to listen and a couple of United States senators. Senator Casey from Pennsylvania is going to sponsor the legislation in the Senate. Congressman Doyle is going to sponsor it in the House. We got 20 senators, 20 congressmen, Republican and Democrat. John Boehner's interested. Pete Sessions is interested. I think we can pull it off. And the goal then would be to build 100 centers in the U.S. right now. That's enough. We got to stop this. Our country's dying, man, because you got all these kids in Newark and all these other places standing around on street corners doing nothing every day. They get up in the morning, that's as far as they get. That doesn't work. We have to turn these folks into assets, and I'm telling you, we can do it. I got training centers that now do this stuff. It is not that big a deal. It's mainly hard work. And maybe some of you fellows and ladies over here at the Princeton University can help me figure this out, man, because I want to work with the brightest kids to change this country's conversation. And I'm not changing my mind ever. We waste a lot of money in the United States of America, a lot. Most of it never gets to where it's supposed to go. This thing is built from the ground up, and it works. So I want my centers. Now, some of you guys are going to go work for Bear Stearns and all that. That's cool. Get rich, just give me some of the money so I can build centers. And then I'll put you on the board. And then we'll scale that. And then finally, I just found this Trivial Pursuit little fact out, which you might find interesting. I lecture at the Harvard Business School, me, Mr. History degree from Pitt. I go up every 2 years. Harvard started tracking me 14 years ago. They've been doing cases, right? So I go out for my little biannual presentation, and all these smart students come in there with the little signs, and they put you down in this little bully pit, and all these smart MBAs sitting up all night with the little highlighters trying to trip you up and stuff. So I did my little presentation, worked out pretty good. And the professor said, for all you Trivial Pursuit buffs, I think you ought to know something. In the history of the Harvard Business School, there have only been 2 organizations that have ever merited 4 cases. And let me tell you some of the ones who didn't get 4 cases. Ritz-Carlton, Marriott, Disney, Boeing, Carnival Cruise Lines, United Airlines. This goes on to so Hilton, all this big, eBay, HP. Only 2 organizations, Manchester Bidwell, Bill Strickland's organization, and Apple Computer, Steve Jobs. So here's a program that works with poor people that's now in the same conversation with Steve Jobs. I'd say that's a very interesting conversation, and it bodes well for the future of this strategy. So that's what I had to say. Thank you for listening. If you've got a question, I'd be glad to answer. Got a couple minutes, I guess. Yeah.
Do you have any plans for transferring your ideas to the public school system, or do you work solely through your centers?
Well, the strategy is to work from the outside in, not the inside out. The system's too big, it's too bureaucratic. So you got to work from the outside in. So my strategy is to form a partnership with public education. I am a public education advocate. Let's be very clear, man. I am for public education. This country ain't gonna make it unless we have a public education system that works. Now, some of my buddies are charter school guys, that's cool. Some of them got proprietary schools, that's fine. Those are not my models. Remember, my life was saved by a public school teacher, man. He would turn over in his grave if he knew I turned my back on the school system. So my strategy is to form partnerships with every school district in this country, because there's not one of them that can solve this problem by themselves. If they think they can, they're out of their minds. The problems are too complicated. The street's too complicated. The drug problems are too complicated. You need guys like me who specialize in that population, and we can do this as a partnership. Not one union guy's got to lose the job, right? We can do this, and we can make it happen, and I'll save you some money in the process, by the way. The unit cost in our school system in Pittsburgh is $20,000 a year. What's tuition at Princeton? 30? What? 40? Okay. Do you have a 50% dropout rate at Princeton in a senior class? Hello? We have a 50% dropout rate with minority kids from grades 9 through 12, man. If I paid $40,000 and got the outcomes that Princeton gets, cool, I'd be willing to pay it. We can't get the outcomes of $20,000. Half the black kids drop out before they even reach 10th grade. That's called crazy, man. Oh, by the way, the blended cost per kid, just for you business majors, it's $20,000 a kid per year multiplied by 12 years. What's that? About $240,000 a year? That's insanity. And we're perfectly prepared to pay that in the United States of America for kids who are going to the penitentiary. Now, I don't care what kind of business course you take, those metrics make no sense to me. And we are perfectly willing to accept that in the public environment. We ain't gonna make it, guys. We're done, man, as a country. This cannot be sustained for the next 20 or 30 years. It's over. So unless we get serious and elevate this thing to the national emergency that it really is, we ain't gonna get it done. So in case you ain't guessed it by now, I'm in a great big hurry. And I have no intentions of changing my mind. We better get on this. And I'm hoping that smart people like you will get on this bandwagon. Okay, that was that question. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is LaShawn Brown. I'm a second-year master's student at the Woodrow Wilson School. We're actually doing some consulting for the Clinton Bush Fund in Haiti, and I noticed that you have some early conversations and some early feasibility for the international community, but given the devastation in Haiti and the lack of economy and the lack of, I guess, investment in human capital there, is that on you guys' plate at all? Or?
Yes. We've had a couple folks from Haiti came up about last month, and they're interested. Maybe after this thing, I'll give you my card. Put us together through email. We'll do Haiti. Big time. I'm doing St. Thomas. I can tell you that. That's not up there because we just signed it up. Some guy from St. Thomas had saw me speak at a bunch of government officials program, and the dude came up and said, man, that's cool. He said, I want you to do this in St. Thomas. I said, well, what do you do for a living? He said, well, I'm the head of the Senate of the Virgin Islands. If I convened a special session of Virgin Islands, would you come down here with your slideshow? I said, yeah, I only got one speech, so if y'all got a slide projector, I'm your man. So I went down to St. Thomas. All the islands agreed to support the idea, and the governor is going to sign the legislation 10 days from now. We're going to do feasibility. And the governor said, if you can pull it off in St. Thomas, that's the gateway to the Caribbean. Got it? You see how this thing can scale itself? That's the point, man. So yeah, Haiti's on the docket, absolutely. Okay, now I don't happen to know President Clinton, but you know, I have a feeling, I know his wife, because when she was First Lady, she came to Pittsburgh, and she's now Secretary of State, so you never know. Every center that I have built has grown out of a slide presentation. Every one. That's why I take this seriously, because you never know who's in the audience. One fellow was in the audience in Austin. He came up to me and said, man, that's a great story. I said, what's your claim to fame? He said, well, I'm head of global strategy for Dell Computers, and Michael sent me here to check you out. Any chance you'd be willing to talk with Michael Dell? I said, yeah, I'll see if I can squeeze him in. So I went back into Austin and met Michael Dell. I showed him the slides. I only got one speech, man. It's the slideshow. So I'm sitting in Michael's office for real. And I showed him this. He said, boy, that's a heck of a story. How much you need to get in one going in Austin? 150,000. Well, here's 75. I give you the whole thing, but I want you to match it, which the mayor of Austin did, by the way. So we're now working in Austin. And then Michael turned to me and says, how can I help you? I said, I want to be you when I grow up, man. I want to be the Dell Computers of, you know, the whole world in social programming, social enterprise. He said, well, cool. What can I do specifically? I said, loan me the head of global strategy for Dell. You pay him, but he comes to work for me. Well, he did. The guy's name is Tim Maddox. He's on my national board, man. He's been on 6 months. I says, your job is to scale this concept. That's your job. And so this is getting very interesting, okay? Very interesting. Everywhere there's a Dell location in the world, I ought to be able to generate a center, bottom line. Or create new markets like Haiti and put a Dell installation there, hello, do the training program that goes with the installation, you got your problem solved. Where are we going? Here.
Hi,
Just yell it out.
Hi, I'm Blair Miller. I'm a senior here at Princeton.
Yep.
I wanted to know, how do people get into your program? Is there you guys make, what's your acceptance?
Interview. We turn down 2 people for every one that gets in. It's an interview. It's all free. And basically it's an interview. And it's not, I'm not interested so much in reading and math, although that's helpful. There's no pass or fail. We just do an assessment to see where you are. Why? Because I can't make a chemical technician out of you if you're reading at a 3rd grade level and doing 2nd grade math. But if you're willing, we can solve your problem because I have an academic program. But we turn down every 2 for one we admit. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. In the old days when I believed in democracy and everybody's created equal and all that, that was in my 60s days. Now I've come to my senses. People earn their way, and when they earn their way, pride comes with it. That's very important. And all the students who come to our center step up, man, because they have something to reach for. I am not in the charity business. If you leave out of here thinking I just gave you a lecture on charity, you flunked the course, man. Okay? This is not charity. I'm in the training business. It just happens to be with poor people. But we turn down 2 for every one. I'm looking for attitude, not aptitude. You get a good attitude, you can teach people something. The next time you go to an employer, ask them the most important quality that they look for in a new employee. And I'm telling you, the vast majority will say attitude. That's the one thing you can't teach. You got to bring that to the job. Okay? Anybody else? I guess. Yes, sir, and then we'll come down here. Yes, sir.
Oh, sure. I just wanted, my name's Rana. I'm a senior here. I was just wondering where you find your teachers, and, you know, obviously an operation like this requires a lot of work and people. Where do you find all those people?
Well, most of the teachers in the public school system want to work for me. The problem is I can't afford them. In my center, you get 3 weeks off after 10 years. In the public school, you get 4 months off after your first year. Those metrics make no sense to me. So that's the first problem. But the teachers still want to work for me. I just can't afford them. So what we do is we find people from industry, who may be at the edge of retirement, who get excited about the idea. We've had faculty do that. And then I've had people, industry professionals, who've come to work there, and they never leave because it's a cool place to come to work. And here's the Bill Strickland School of Management. You want to be a vice president with me? Go find a piece of the world that you want to conquer, get somebody to fund it, and I'll print a card that says you're the vice president of that. Miraculously, all of the vice presidents at my center were people who were doing other jobs unrelated to what they're managing now. Every one of them. Because it's a built-in incentive system. Pretty easy. Okay? Here and then here. Yes, ma'am.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm Katie Stauffer, and I'm a sophomore. I was just wondering, what kind of support do you provide for people that go through your training program or your school once they finish the program and are going into actually working for these different Rite Aid or whatnot?
You mean the graduates of the vocational school?
Yes.
We stay in touch with them for about a year on a periodic basis. A lot of them come back. We're building an alumni association so that it's good to get them back to reinforce what they're doing, but they also assume responsibility for the next group. So I bring them back as guest lecturers. I bring them back as former employees or former students who are now employees. So we maintain a very active relationship with the graduates. We have an alumni association, and we have a graduation each year. We bring all the graduates back, or many of them back. And that's worked out. So it's a very strong sense of camaraderie and community. So you don't drop through the crack. Okay, this is a program in which you are part of a community. If you ever want to get motivated, come to one of my graduations. I'm pretty hard-nosed. I've been around poverty and all that. Every one I'm crying. Every one of them, man. I mean, stories that you just can't believe. That, like miracles, with people who just couldn't find their way. But they're in my center and they're fine. So that's a good thing. How much? One more? Two more? One more. Okay, who's somebody? Anybody? Did you have a question?
Yeah.
I was gonna ask for a job, but being a senior, then I hear that you hire people that are pretty well off.
Pretty well off?
Well, industry people that,
Oh, no, don't go there. Some of them are well off and some of them ain't well off. But as long as they're bright and they know what they're doing, that's why I hire them. It's not their I'm not looking for their balance sheet. I'm looking for their ideas. And where are you going to go after you graduate?
I was hoping at your center.
Well, we're going to definitely exchange cards.
Okay.
And part of my future plan for the world, since everything is relationships, right, is to keep track of you, man, and find out where you're going. Because I've had a couple nibbles from Kyoto, Japan. We've had a couple nibbles from China. So there may be a whole discussion with Singapore and a few other of these Far Eastern countries. Like I said, I'm trying to do this globally. And the way I'm going to do it is to know people just like you guys. I keep track of you. And you never know, we might end up working together. All right, last question up in the back, and then I'll go out and we'll drink soft drinks or something. Okay, go ahead.
The question is, one aspect of the education for special kids with autism, these kids learn through art, which, I have experience of. And if they are exposed to the program you are doing, I think they can be really employed in the right places instead of, being struggling in life.
I agree with that. I'd like to build on that idea. I've sort of backed into a theory of education without knowing it. I mean, I didn't sort of plan this. I'm always reporting back to you what actually happens in the place. But most of the hip companies, Starbucks, Steelcase, all these are Whole Foods. I'm sort of the Whole Foods of training people in the inner city, as it turns out. That's the crowd I like to hang with, all innovative guys. So I think you're right. That's a very astute observation. Thank you. We're going to go do some soft drinks. And your homework assignment is buy the book and start lobbying to get used at Princeton, because I want it on my resume as a freshman reader, and then we'll be cool. Thanks.